This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Audible. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Thursday, July 28th, 2022, and I have the excellent Sean Riley of Laptop Mag here with me. Hi, Sean. How are you?
I'm doing well, Miriam. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited that you said yes. You've been on my list for a while, and I was like, oh, let's reach out, see if we can make this happen. You just reviewed the Pixel 6a, and even though we did review that last week on the show, I'd love to hear your thoughts because they might be different than my previous guests. But also, you did a story, you co-authored a story about the best budget phones. And I would like to rephrase that as the best affordable phones, because in my mind, budget is more like prepaid $200 phones. We're looking at more like $300 to $500, right? But at the same time, that's a very important segment because I don't know. I think with the current economy and the US market being very carrier centric, people go to the carrier store, they get a deal. They don't realize they're going to spend a fortune for 2 years with this iPhone 13 Pro or Samsung Galaxy S22. Sure, they get a great phone, but perhaps this is a good time to teach folks about the mid-range and the fact that they could own a phone up front that is awesome, not flagship, but still awesome, and doesn't cost them as much in the long run, right?
Right. Yeah. The Pixel A series honestly was part of the motivating factor for kind of pushing that range there up to 500 to bring it into inclusion, just because I think it is such a great value, even though it's not, sort of an extremely cheap phone. And we do have some, I have a few on that list that are under 200. And the other thing that is interesting is I have a bunch of, European colleagues, and the budget phone realm there is I'm really looking at it from a US perspective in that post, whereas, the budget phone overseas is vastly different from what we have, particularly if you're willing to go up to $500. For my purposes of that list, I'm really pretty much focused on the US market.
And that's fair. And that's kind of also why I wanted that, because the audience here is international. We have a lot of folks in Asia, India, Australia, Europe, and of course, majority of Canadians and Americans. But my audience is tech savvy, early adopters. They follow all the Chinese stuff. So, they are on top of it. So still, it's kind of harder to point my audience to specifically US supported phones, which is why I thought, for a change, let's not, talk about Redmi, Realme, Oppo, Vivo, Poco, and the rest of the gang out there that is making absolutely brilliant mid-range and budget or affordable phones. But let's have a look at what we can slum with here in the US. And I think the Pixel 6a is the least slummy of all of them. I think it's probably the most well-rounded right now, along with the Galaxy A53, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's, and also it gets you so close to the Pixel 6 experience. Now, the cameras are absolutely a step down, but, still excellent. They're that same step down that, Google had been using in its quote unquote flagships for, the last several years now. And so, thanks to the, their computational photography chops, they're able to make what is, what would be a mid-range, at best, sensor in most cameras into something that produces results that blows away, I think anything else in this price category.
Yeah, and frankly, I feel like seeing the photos that have been taken and being familiar with the previous 5As, folks, I'm still waiting for my review unit. It'll happen. Just hang tight. And having a Pixel 6 Pro myself, it's interesting because I feel like that 12 megapixel main sensor that they've been using for so many years is so well tuned right now that I often find that in fringe cases, I can take better photos with an A phone than with the 6 Pro, because they still haven't mastered how to really get that computational pipeline to work for all the cases with that very large 50 megapixel Samsung. I think they're using like some GN1 sensor or some, And honestly, we're talking splitting hairs here, right? The Pixel 6 Pro is amazing, takes incredible great photos, but I've kind of been in love with the 6A's photos, at least what I've seen of the 6A's photos, and my own 5A photos since I've had the 6 Pro. Every now and then I pull it out and use it for something, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's a certain flavor to that sensor that maybe it's familiarity, and I've been using so many pixels for so long that I kind of love that vibe, and I'm seeing a slightly different vibe with the 6 and 6 Pro. And I mean, to me, what stands out with the 6A is that, you're making compromise on that 60 hertz on the display, and you're getting that lesser sensor as a main sensor. But everything else, I mean, you're getting the tensor chip, which it's kind of like the iPhone SE, right? Which is also on your list, which is like you're getting the best chip you can get from that company and all the software goodness that comes with it, right?
Right. Yeah. And I actually had, which I don't think has been sort of uniformly the case for people, but I actually had better performance out of the 6A in our testing than we got out of the 6, which is somewhat unusual, but
that is odd,
unanticipated. But yeah, it's interesting because the things with a lot of the phones in this range, including the Galaxy A53, is performance is what takes a pretty serious hit. So the Galaxy A53 has 120 hertz display. And, I mean, Samsung is unmatched when it comes to displays. There's just no question there. But the performance is absolutely a step down. Like, you are not really going to be gaming on that phone or anything. Whereas, I mean, Tensor's fine. I can play PUBG Mobile on it. It, runs everything cleanly, smoothly. No, it's not 120 hertz, but I don't know that I find that to be sort of the, death knell for a phone that some people consider it to be. I think it's still acceptable. And I guess I didn't also run into some, I know some reviewers reported that they really felt that it was even slower than the 60 hertz implied. And that I didn't encounter personally.
Yeah, I read that too. I mean, I think that's more of a software tuning thing. I'm not too worried about, I mean, Google always tweaks their software over time. We all know this, and sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But I think this comes with the Pixel territory. If you decide to go with the Pixel, be aware that Google doesn't always have it together when it comes to software, and experiments sometimes and make mistakes. And if you want stability and just kind of more consistency over time, I think probably a Samsung's better. But you're right. In this case, the A53's Achilles heel, in my opinion, is that processor. It's an Exynos, right? Or what are they using?
I think it is the Exynos.
Yeah. And that's the other problem, right? It's like Tensor kind of also spawns out of Exynos, and 5G performance is always a bit iffy on these Samsung radios, in my opinion, compared to equivalent Qualcomm or even, frankly, MediaTek right now. And that is something Samsung hopefully is working on. I think Tensor has a 1.5-year-old 5G modem in there. And it's a separate chip as far as I know, too, which is, hopefully the next gen of Tensor can integrate the modem for better, battery life and thermals and everything else. But I think these are like academic issues. If you're buying this phone or considering these phones, basically, if you want the best performance, the Pixel is it. If you want the better display, probably the Samsung, right? The Samsung also brings some features that I would love to see on the 6A, like wireless charging, which we have on the 6 and 6 Pro, and personally, I really love and use a lot. But I think I'm totally willing to live without that. The fact that it still has a metal frame, the fact that, we have that camera system that outperforms still after, what is it now, 7 years of using that sensor?
Something like that, yeah.
Like, maybe I'm exaggerating, but I think it's Pixel 2. So, okay, not 7, but 5 years. And, Pixel 1 had a slightly different version. It didn't have OIS and stuff. And I say sensor here, but I mean sensor and lens combo. I think there were some small variations between the Pixel 2 and Pixel 3 on the lens system there, but whatever. Anyway, the point is, to me, those are the two top ones. But you picked some interesting ones. So walk us through the other ones. Of course, the iPhone SE, that goes without saying, right?
Right. Yeah. The iPhone SE, I don't personally, I have some objections to it, but it's, There's no question. I mean, it's a phone that will be supported for, I'm sure, 6 years at a minimum, software wise. And obviously the A15 Bionic is going to be, probably still in 3 years, the fastest, processor, faster than anything that, is available on Android, most likely. Um, so, I mean, the design is the thing that, the design, the camera situation, I don't love.
The display as well, I think,
and the
is
display. Yeah. It's just, and those hurt it as an overall package for me, but at the same time, if you're looking for something affordable, if you want it, and, obviously the iOS ecosystem is, and the Apple ecosystem in general is just the biggest selling point there. You're getting in, not quite as affordably as you used to, but, as you could for the old one, but still at right around $400. So roughly half what we're anticipating is likely going to be the cheapest iPhone soon here. So
for sure. Yeah. So I feel for me, it's hard to be mad at the iPhone SE because they're using these economies of scale by using that chassis, camera system, and display that are a little long in the tooth, in my opinion. But, my spouse has an SE, the previous one, the 4G one, not the original, but they love it because they are an iPhone user and they also use this Flip 3, which is kind of fun. And primarily they use the iPhone. And they love the home button still. They just don't like the Face ID on the newer iPhones. I kind of wish that for the next SE, that's kind of my dream, that they recycle maybe some of the older iPhone 11s or something. That way we get a better display. We get the dual camera system. Like, I think the SE desperately needs an ultra wide. Like, I can still live with the display somewhat and this, bezel and the home button. But like the fact that they didn't modify the chassis just a little bit, they're clearly trying to get that tooling all the way till it dies. You know what I'm saying? And I get it. But at the same time, I'm like, come on, Apple, you have so much money. Like, how hard would it be to just give us a new chassis or slightly modified chassis? Okay.
Well, yeah, roll the right, and I guess I know people love that design, so it is hard because it's like you obviously rolling the fingerprint sensor into the power button as you do on the iPads.
That would be a good idea, honestly.
Would be nice. Would give you the small, the truly small form factor that people claim to like, but the market never seems to bear out. But
yeah, that is another conversation that we've had on the show, and we could tangent into is the small flagship, or like there's I think a Zenfone 8 last year comes to mind. I think the upcoming Zenfone 9 is going to continue carrying that torch, and of course there's not that many. Like, you really have to go hunting down. Sony for a while was making the compact series, which is pretty cool. But I think you're right, it's not only is it not a high demand thing, right? It's nobody really seems to care. There's a very vocal group that cares, but the other problem is that from a technical perspective, it's really adding a can of worms to the equation, right? Because how do you get that battery life when you have that small of a battery, right? Like, Apple obviously has done a pretty good job with the 12 mini and the 13 mini now, but it's still not comparable, right? And people are still complaining. So I don't know how you fix that other than making it thicker. And then it feels odd to look at a phone that's kind of out of proportion from mind's eye, And then the other problem you run into is, for me, it's real estate on the display. And this is why my spouse loves the Flip 3, right? So they tend to do most of their productivity stuff on the iPhone because they're familiar with it. The workflow is familiar. They like the small screen. It's easier for their small hands to type on. But when they play games is when it gets hard. So that's when they pull out the Flip 3 and they have all this real estate, but in their pocket, it's nice and compact. So I think the Apple, if they can pull off doing a Flip competitor at some point, that thing's going to explode in popularity. Like, I think it's going to be killer.
Yeah, that was what I think I either brought that up in my Flip 3 review or I wrote a separate op-ed, and it's been a year now and I just can't remember. But it's, that was kind of my argument, was that the Flip is the embodiment of what the Mini sort of wants to be. It is giving you the best of, a small phone while you still get to have the best of a, full-size phone that, obviously, we've seen over the years, everything has gone to larger and larger displays. So that is, just clear cut. That is what people want. So, but obviously the dream is to have it be pocketable too. And the Flip makes that possible. I guess battery life, if you aren't using it as a second phone, is probably the biggest issue that you run into with the Flip still. But
Still better than the SE.
yes,
Still better than the SE.
battery life, I forgot, that is the other component that is really rough. Whereas I found the 6A to be quite good.
So you have a couple of motos in there. Obviously, the G Power is really low end in terms of its specs. And the G series has always delivered. I still feel that Moto's lost the plot on the G series a little bit. I think this is a Motorola pricing issue we've addressed many times on the podcast, and I've actually addressed in person with the execs at Moto multiple times now. And I'm hoping, there's rumors of a new Edge coming out soon, not the Edge Plus, we just got that one a while back, but a new Edge coming out supposedly. And I'm hoping that they're finally getting the price right, because it's not so much that the price is bad once it hits the shelves, because you get discounts. They have always these BOGOs through the carriers. They're very carrier centric, Moto. So if you go through a carrier, you can get a really good deal on these phones. And also they have sales on their websites almost right away, right? But why don't they give us an MSRP that matches that reality? Because every time I write a review about a Moto phone, I always end up saying it's too expensive, because all they're giving me is the MSRP unlocked. And their unlocked models always have more RAM and storage, which is lovely, but it makes the price higher. So it skews people into, I'm not going to buy this. I'm going to go buy a Samsung or a Pixel or whatever. And I love the Moto software experience. So many people would benefit from that experience. But, I look at specifically the Edge Plus I recently reviewed, and then the Stylus 5G, the G Stylus 5G this year. Mm-hmm. I can't believe that phone with its spec is a $500+ phone. Like, you gotta be kidding us, Moto, right? Like, and I feel the same about the G Power. And you mentioned the G Stylus in your review, Aviel. I presume you mean the 4G version of the Stylus in your review, right? In your roundup? Okay. That's a bit more, I think, priced right. But if you look at the specs on those, they've gone down to 720p. And it's like, I feel like perhaps Moto can be a little more competitive. It is, after all, owned by Lenovo, and they could, maybe be slightly more expensive than all those great Chinese affordable phones that we can't have, but still bring that love to Latin America, North America, and those markets where the G series is popular. I would love to see a little bit more from them. Like, they put a 50 megapixel sensor on these phones, and it's like an OmniVision. It's terrible. Like, and they already don't know how to tune cameras in the first place. We have this running joke on the podcast. I don't want to make Moto the butt of jokes, but that they are the lowest common denominator in camera quality. Like, if you can beat Moto, you've achieved something. Like, you're at passable levels of performance with cameras. And I feel that, it doesn't matter what sensor you put in there. I'd rather have a 12 megapixel that's better tuned, like the Pixel 6a, than this 50 megapixels they've been putting on the G Power, G Stylus, everything lately that is very, very meh, because they still don't know how to tune the pixel binning and all the algorithms. So this is kind of my take. I want to see, remember the G series of past, like the G6, the G5, metal body, glass back, specs that were worthy, and maybe the profit margin weren't as high, but I felt like I could recommend these affordable phones to people and feel like they were getting something special. But you look at how plasticky these phones are now, and like the spec sheet, like MediaTek, I'm fine with. It's just that somehow every time I use like a MediaTek Helio based G phone from Moto, the performance sucks. And I know it's not the Helio, because I have these imported phones like the Infinix that are sold in Africa, and the I don't know if you're familiar with the brand Techno. They're all Helio G based chipsets with 4G, and they just run circles around those Moto Gs with the same chips. So
yeah, we just got to look at one of the recent Technos, actually pretty. That was, I think, last month. And yes, I agree. The performance is much better. The G Power is, and I agree, it has slowly lost the plot, I think, is a perfect way to describe that. In terms of Motorola's tact with the G Power, because the price has both gone, slowly edged up, and battery life has actually gotten worse than it used to be. So I think
Right.
like
That used to be the thing. The power was like basically a power bank with a phone attached to it. That's what it used to be, right?
yeah, I think it was like the 2019 might have been like the high water mark for it, where it was like 16 something hours in our test, which is off the charts for our test, basically.
Right.
Which is, yeah, it's continuous web surfing over, well, LTE at the time, now 5G, but yeah, so it's never gotten to that point again. So I mean, it is, and I'm trying to hit specific buyers as part of what I'm trying to hit with the budget phone. So I'm like, do you just want a phone that's going to last a really long time? And it gets okay support, but again, there's a really hard fall off when you come down from the the Pixel 6a and the iPhone. And I mean, and now the Galaxy A53, which I update this pretty regularly, and that probably deserves to claim the next spot up. And our lists aren't really meant to be ordered lists. They are, I'm very careful with the top spot and, the top two spots really, but from there it's more of, these are all phones in this price range that I like. So, I mean, the A53 probably belongs above it. And, the A53 has a little bit of the same problem that the Motorola does, in that its list price is $449, but you will always find it cheaper than that.
Right. Totally.
And I mean, it's funny you mentioned Motorola too. Lenovo owning Motorola, and Lenovo, because obviously working for laptop, I review a lot of Lenovo laptops. I run into the same issue with Lenovo laptops all the time too, where I'm like, well, this is the stated price for it, but the reality is you are never going to pay that amount when you go to buy it. It's, often there's always deals either through Lenovo's site or through others. So it does make it an interesting game trying to sort of judge it versus the other things in its price class, when its real price class is hundreds less than its stated price.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, the drilling has begun again. If you were here 2 weeks ago, you know about that. There's really little I can do about it, so I'll try to remove most of it in post. But if you hear something that sounds a bit weird in the background of my voice, you know what to expect. The one that stands out to me here in this list is one of my favorite phones I've reviewed this spring, and that's the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. Absolutely all-around fantastic phone for the money. I think it could be better in some ways, but they kind of nailed it. The only drawback I feel, obviously, is the lack of AT&T 5G support, which is always an issue with OnePlus. But everything else about it, I think, yeah, okay, it's missing an ultra wide. That's another thing that I think would be a cincher instead of those, hypothetical 2 megapixel macro sticker cams, I call them. It's like they might as well be stickers, right? What's your take on this phone?
Yeah, I loved that phone. I reviewed it, and it's I mean, it looks absolutely gorgeous too. It's it does not feel like you are using a sub $200 phone, and it hits 90 hertz, which Pixel 6a doesn't deliver at more than twice the price. You get micro SD, that's great. The performance isn't fantastic, but again, we're really, now we are into that extreme budget affordable range where I think you have to expect you're going to be making some sacrifices. And I mean, I think the camera performance from what is there is not bad. So it's and so software update, I think is software update is one of the big sacrifices you're making. And then yeah, other than that, that display, again, what kind of buyer are you? If you're really someone who's into cameras, this is not a phone you're going to pick up. But, if you want a good display, decent performance, and a nice looking phone, it's unbeatable at under 200.
Absolutely. And the other thing to your point is I feel like the cameras are not as bad as people make it out to be. I mean, for what it is, it's got a solid baseline. It's challenged in the extreme conditions, low light and whatever. But overall, I feel like BBK Group's camera tuning has gotten pretty decent. That means that even OnePlus benefits from that at kind of that lower level, basically, right? So I think overall, it's been one of my favorites simply because, well, mostly I'm also a T-Mobile customer, and it started out as a T-Mobile phone. And obviously, it's nice to have that option in the staple, as it were, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just... also feel the software, it's ColorOS with the skin on top. It's like a flavor of ColorOS nowadays, Oxygen. So really, like I have a bunch of Realme and OnePlus and Oppo phones here that I kind of cycle through. And honestly, the user experience is pretty much the same. We've kind of lost everything that Oxygen OS stood for. And I'm not completely mad about it. Like, don't get me wrong. I think the height of Oxygen OS probably was the OnePlus 7 Pro, 7T time period there. It's not coming back, guys. So like that's a dead horse we've beaten to death again. So I think we're just not going to worry about it. I wish it was different. It's not my favorite, but it's totally usable and passable. It's not Moto, honestly. I love the Moto experience. It's not Pixel. I love the Pixel experience. Although I have to say the Pixel experience is not for everyone. Some people are put off by the Pixel experience because it is so googly. Like I don't mind, but I think some people are just like, they can't think that way. And, Samsung ultimately kind of holds the key to the most universal flavor of Android for North America. That's what people think of when they think of an Android phone. And of course, they think of that when they think of the software experience of an Android phone, right?
Yeah, I had that issue with my dad was looking for a new phone this year, and he uses a lot of voice control features, and so he's been a Samsung user for years and years and years, and so I did give him the warning that it's going to change slightly, that it's going to be a little different, but I had him try the Pixel 6, he went with the Pixel 6 Pro, because for the voice controls and the dictation, and he could not get over the software differences. And that is a hard thing for me to think about, being as I switch so often between all of them that I forget, sometimes how different the people, if you become accustomed to one version of Android, that even within Android it can be extremely difficult, because I rail against all the time the sort of iOS versus Android arguments that people get into, because especially these days they're more similar than they have ever been. They deliver largely similar feature sets, and it's, you spend a few weeks with either one and you're gonna adjust, but it is funny. It is startling to people even within Android. So that's something I need to be careful with when I'm making recommendations too.
So I think this is a good time to kind of bring up a couple of things. The first one is that this podcast exists as a video. If you guys want to see this podcast before the public audio version, you can do that. I publish about a day or two before in video format for my patrons at Patreon. So if you want to join Patreon and help out, that's one of the tiers. Number two, I need a recommendation from the audience, and maybe from you, Sean, as well. My spouse obviously is using the Fold 3. That's a relatively recent thing for them. And I have used so many flavors of Android. When they ask me a very simple question, like, how do I take a screenshot? I mean, I know what to do, right? You volume down and power, but then the screen that pops up after that. How do you share from there? How do you edit from there? I have no idea. Like, my workflow on all Android phones is I take the screenshot, I wait for it to save to the gallery, I go to the gallery, I find whatever weird folder they picked to put it on, and I do my thing, right? But for my spouse, it's more like, how do I do that? And I'm like, I really don't know the specifics. Like, I can't give you exact steps because in my mind, I just kind of do it, right? So what I want to know from the audience is, do you recommend a good YouTube video, a good tutorial for somebody switching from iPhone to Samsung specifically, like in the last year or so, with the most recent One UI kind of experience? So if you have that, hit me or Sean or both of us up on Twitter. Let me know. I would love to be able to pass that on to my spouse so that I don't always look like a complete monkey when they ask me, how do you do something simple that I think I know how to do, but then I realize I don't actually have exact steps on how to do, because Samsung flavor of Android versus what phone did I just use today? Oh, a Vivo X80 Pro. And now that's the mindset I'm in, and it's completely different, So yeah, any thoughts yourself on that? Or
it's a problem you've seen? I run into violently when I'm trying to do an Android how-to article, because I've kind of learned that it is almost fruitless to try to cover everything. and I have a few that are like that, and it's, I have how to take a screenshot on Android, and it's, I tried to cover Samsung, OnePlus, and Pixel, and it's like, well, I'm hitting I'm hitting, some of the major points, but I mean, that is leaving open a massive swath of phones that handle things differently. So, and it's, it makes it harder for people to search for it too. So it is a real issue. That is a real issue with Android, to try to get people how-tos that are relevant to their specific phone. That would be a daunting undertaking to try to cover, close to everything.
I'll give you another example that happened with my spouse specifically. The first time they took the screenshot and they finally figured out that there's a toolbar that pops up, they want to edit right from in there. Guess what it said? It popped up a box. Would you like to use the gallery or Google Photos to edit? And of course it said, the always or this time only, right? And they're like, why? It's not in any steps I read on the internet. And I'm like, because those steps are like me making a whole bunch of assumptions. So it's really hard, I think, for some users to kind of wrap their heads around it. I think this is the part where, especially for an iPhone user going to Android, it's like, you're going to see that box only once if you hit always at that point, right? Mm-hmm. Of course, you're going to see that box every time if you don't hit always. And then why, like, they look to me, it's like, why is there 2 photo apps? I'm like, oh boy. Oh boy, how do I explain this, right? And, some people are like, oh yeah, I understand Google Photos because I have it on my iPhone. But in their case, they're not using Google Photo on the iPhone, so they don't get it. They're like, why is there 2 galleries? I'm like, well, because Android. So yeah, it's just interesting. It's just an interesting experience. I think I'm learning a lot of the assumptions. I mean, I don't write how-tos because I probably would suck at it. But at the same time, I admire folks who do, because, what about that special case of the first time you use your phone, right? Where you get that dialogue that tells you which app to use to associate with the action you're making, right? And should that even be there, right? Like, I mean, how do you get over that? You want to give people options and choices, but, maybe we might write these tutorials assuming that, it's all Samsung all the way, right? So it's like going to be the Samsung gallery they're using, and there's no other app installed. But then again, we all know Google likes to put their little fingers in there and has Google Photos no matter what. So,
yeah, I mean, until, that was such an easy recommendation until last year when they pulled the, free storage. Yes. So that at least changed the equation. Now I wouldn't be so, I mean, it's still hard to not recommend Google Photos, but it at least changed the equation.
What would you recommend, honestly, beyond Google Photos today to like cloud storage?
For cloud storage, I got to think about it. I stuck with Google Photos and just bit the bullet, and I have Google Stores, but I did do
yeah, me too.
I'm trying to think of, there were several that were compelling. The best solution that I have found, if you don't want to go with Google Photos, is iDrive Photos, and they released a new plan pretty much in line with Google Photos going away as a free storage solution last year. That's $10 a year, and it's unlimited photo and video storage.
Wow.
Yeah, which is just a great value. And they try to put forth some some solutions like Google Photos has to surface relevant photos for you, and it gives you a nice visual presentation of the photos. So if you're looking for something that's cheaper than Google Drive, Google Photos storage, that is an excellent unlimited option, and one of the few unlimited options, because that's the other issue you encounter. Like Amazon Photos does a good job, but you have limitations when it comes to video, and Flickr is just more expensive, and also people aren't that Flickr's feels like
it's not very mobile friendly, right?
Yeah. So iDrive Photos is a pretty good option if you want to avoid Google Photos.
Just hope that they stay in business and make sure you back up to some kind of storage solution, either at home or in the cloud as well. That's the challenge, right? It's like the nice thing about Google and Apple, you're pretty sure you're going to have those photos in a few years, but remember, the cloud is the cloud. Ah, man. All right, let's talk about the Nubia RedMagic 7S Pro. Our review is up on Pocket Now. My colleague Roland wrote it. He's UK-based. I have the phone as well. What I can tell you is this, RedMagic doesn't always have the best software and camera experience. That's still one of their Achilles heel. But if you want a gaming phone that hits all the right things, everything you'd want on a gaming phone, this is it. Like with the 8 Plus Gen 1 now, that's what the S stands for, because they did a RedMagic 7 Pro with the 8 Gen 1 before that. It's the same phone in every way other than the processor. With that chip, it's like better thermals, better efficiency, exactly what we're seeing, exactly what Qualcomm promised. So it's incredible to me that just switching to TSMC gave them that kind of headroom. And this phone, it's got great thermals, great battery life, and it's a bit more compact because instead of having speakers at the top and bottom of the display and a bezel, they've done a kind of like edge-to-edge basically display. But instead of 165 hertz, like the non-pro version of these phones, you're getting a 120 hertz display because there's an under-display camera for the front-facing camera. But it's a very well hidden one. It's not like the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 3 where you can really see there's something there. They've done a good job. ZTE's been, the parent company Nubia, ZTE based. They've been working on this under-display camera stuff for a while. So the imaging performance of the under-display camera is not that great. It's better than it was in previous gens, but and RedMagic's never been good on cameras anyway. But in terms of hiding the camera, really good. So if you're playing a game, you're getting the full experience. You're getting very little bezels. The speakers are side firing now. It's a pretty thick phone because of the fan and the large battery. But, I've been really enjoying it. It's a chunker of a phone, but if you're gaming, you got the trigger buttons, you got a super fast touch response, incredible performance. The fan lets you enjoy that performance for hours on end, literally. Without the fan, you're still getting really good performance. If you want to throw a quick game together for 10, 15, 20 minutes, you're still dropping very little. Even on the most demanding, games. So, and it starts at $729, which, for a phone that's officially sold in the US with 5G support on T-Mo and AT&T and others is a nice to have. So, it's not for me. I'm not a hard enough gamer to really justify owning one of these. And I certainly wouldn't want to make it my main phone with the imaging and software issues. And I say software issues, it's just, weird translations and small bugs here and there. We're not talking about showstoppers here. But for the price, not too shabby. Not too shabby at all. What's your take on these?
Yeah, I'm always amazed. And I also have European colleagues, and they handle most of these gaming phones that even if they are available here, don't sort of rise to the same level of prominence here. And yeah, the value is astounding in terms of performance. If you're willing to, forego some of the, software support and, camera niceties that you get on, the sort of full-priced flagships. If you're just looking for a gaming phone, it's, they are an unbelievable value. And it's great that has the phone integrated, because I've used a number of the ROG phone, the ROG phone 5 and 6. They have the, fan accessory, but it's, you get to the point where you're carrying a small backpack with you to, properly outfit your phone. And
but isn't that the gamer life? Like anybody who has a Wii,
Sure.
What is it called? Not the Wii, the portable. Is going to have
Switch,
like a bag, and the Switch is what I meant. It's going to have a bag and stuff. No, it's true though. You're right. And I think actually RedMagic makes an external cooler also, like an addition, at least for the previous chassis. Also, 18 gigs of RAM is an option. 18 gigs of RAM, guys. $899 for the 18 gig version, 512 gigs of storage on that one. The 729 is 12 gigs, which is still really great. 256. I mean, how many phones do you know cost that price point, have that level of performance and that kind of storage and RAM in the US, sold and supported with 5G? Like, gotta give them some kudos, and it's glass and aluminum. It's not like a plasticky crap, poorly put together phone either, No,
it's an interesting looking phone. I mean, it's not just a pure, it does scream that it is a gamer phone, but I don't think in an obscene fashion as some of them do. It's a nice looking phone.
100%. And then the other thing is good to know about the Nubia / RedMagic like ZTE phones, ZTE phones, is that if you want to install the Google camera, you can actually get quite a bit better performance immediately out of that. So just be mindful and aware of that. Like, it's an option. Like, if you are potentially buying this as your main phone and you do want a bit more camera performance, Google's got you. I mean, you're gonna have to find one of those APKs out there, but because it's a Snapdragon based phone with a standard Samsung sensor and the previous ones had Sony sensors, they're pretty well supported. It's not like some kind of obscure weird setup, right? So consider that if you are a bit of a, or if you're a gamer, you're into tweaking things anyway. So I'm sure you'll be fine installing and finding that Google camera APK. The next thing I want to talk about is just, I basically just want to mention that the phone is officially available. Reviews are out. Check them out. Check our review on Pocket now. But the thing that's, I think, probably the most like eyebrow raising story this week is this story The Verge got first, but it turns out that we all got that PR later from OnePlus, that yes, the OnePlus 10T will not have an alert slider, just like the Nord N200 5G, like the Nord N series, which is the North American affordable budget Nord series, which is a little lower end than the Nord series in Europe, is never had the alert slider. And so we kind of got over it, but I have a harder time swallowing that for a phone that bills itself as a flagship on the OnePlus lineup. Is this a result of the oppification of OnePlus, you think, or is this just really what they're saying? We ran out of space, we added all this extra stuff in there, and we couldn't make it work.
I mean, I suspect we'll have our answer when the next, when we get the next OnePlus phone. But
yeah, on August 3rd.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm inclined to believe. I mean, also just from a cost savings perspective, I can imagine it. It's they're not going to likely say that, but it's I think that seems plausible. I'm curious. It's interesting because it is such a sticking point for long time OnePlus fans, and I just don't know.
That's why I think it's a bit weird. Yeah,
and it's interesting because obviously OnePlus is built on cultivating this dedicated audience, so it is interesting for them to do something that I think they had to know full well was going to irritate a large section of that fan base. But so I don't know if that speaks to what they think of the OnePlus 10T, or if they, I don't know. It is an interesting move from them, and it's not. I mean, it. I know it's hard to design around all of these things, so it's not that I don't believe that is possible, but at the same time, it does seem like, well, you could have designed around it. You didn't. You made as with anything, you made the decision not to. So
yeah, to me, it screams more like a cost thing. I could be wrong here, but like, look, all the rumors are pointing to this having 150 watt charging like the OnePlus 10R, which is totally makes sense, but I still don't see why that would preclude taking a tiny little real estate to have a slider. There's also some antennas. Apparently there's 15 separate antennas in this phone, I guess, so that I don't know why they changed the antenna system, but probably for, a lot of people play games on their flagships, and if you're holding it horizontally, you generally see a slight decrease in Wi-Fi and cellular performance. So my only guess, and this is me putting my engineering hat on, is that they wanted to optimize for use case in portrait and landscape. And that I could see, if you start adding more antennas, you start running into the real estate issues for sure. But, also we don't know, does this phone have millimeter wave? I doubt it, based on the fact that the 10 Pro doesn't have it. So I don't think that's the kind of antennas we're talking about. So I don't know. It seems like they manufactured a really good excuse. And it's a possible, plausible, reasonable excuse, but to me, it still feels like an excuse, and I can't let them off the hook on the no slider. This is one of those things that really defines the OnePlus experience. I'm sorry, guys. Like, so frustrating.
Well, which especially as you have less and less that defines design for a lot of the manufacturers. It's like losing anything that is sort of a unique identifier for your brand is unfortunate these days.
On the plus side, it does look like a OnePlus 10 Pro. Like it's got that cool industrial design,
Mhm.
which I think is unique and stands out. And I think that's a good thing. So, I mean, that's according to The Verge here, that has some sort of leaked photo or something. But anyway, look, we're going to find out soon. And I would say if you're listening right now, folks, we've all gone through the chagrin of OnePlus's change and evolution and oppification, and don't get too mad when things don't go your way next time here, because I think we're going to be a little disappointed in some areas. But of course, this is rumored to be 8 Plus Gen 1, and I'm pretty sure it's going to pack a while up. Like, I think that's one thing that I think OnePlus is not going to sacrifice. And then the big question mark would be, and to me, it's another thing. Like, if you're trying to save costs, if Oppo is trying to save costs by removing the alert slider on this phone, if the price reflects that, I'm not going to be quite as mad, right? Like, the thing that challenges with OnePlus has been both the oppification, the loss of their personality a little bit, and then the software experience being colorless, right? But also the pricing hasn't quite been as aggressive as what we used to have. And I think that's also kind of compounding it. Like, I think we'd be more willing to accept some changes if this feels like a OnePlus flagship price, right? Yeah, that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, I mean, especially after losing the 10 last year, I think that OnePlus fans would certainly be pleased if that lands sort of in the well enough below the OnePlus 10 Pro that you feel like you have that affordable flagship back again. I mean, much like they do have everywhere else, just not, we don't seem to have
for
here.
Sure. But let's remember that's happened before. On the 7 series, we never got the OnePlus 7. We only got the 7 Pro, and then we got the 7T, and the 7T was an awesome phone. So maybe we'll be, like, this will disappoint us for sure, all of us, I'm sure. But this might be compensated for by, this pricing or something else that we don't know about yet. So stay tuned, but expect more controversy. This is basically what I'm saying. A couple of leaks, and I just want to touch on briefly because we should probably wrap up soon. But Pixel 7 series camera sensors leak. This is specifically sensors, not the camera specs. We kind of knew what the camera specs were, I think, from the keynote at Google I/O. But this seems to indicate a small change, at least in the ultra-wide sensor on the 7 Pro. So instead of a IMX sensor, which is right now the IMX 381 on the ultra-wide, they're going to go for a Samsung GM1. Yeah, it's interesting because they have the GN1 on the main and then GM like mother on the ultra wide, according to this leak. Does that matter? I don't know. Also, front facing camera is supposed to be a Samsung 3J1, 11 megapixel for both, which is a slight change from the Sony's on the previous 6 and 6 Pro. But here's the thing, folks. As Google and Samsung work closer together on the Tensor chipset and on optimizing the experience in the processors and radios and stuff, it makes sense to me. The display is Samsung probably too, that they would adopt more Samsung parts for their partnership. And so this camera sensors are moving away from Sony, which is what they were using on their Snapdragon phones, to a Samsung sensor. And thankfully, Samsung has some pretty decent sensors nowadays on their roster. It didn't used to be the case. I used to always be a huge fan of Sony's in terms of tuning. I always thought they were better tuned, or at least had better software pipelines available. But I've seen some pretty good results now from Vivo and Xiaomi on the high end using the Samsung 50 megapixel, 108 megapixel, and other sensors. So I'm not going to worry about this.
No, I find it interesting purely from the, Google obviously had, as we covered with the 6A, has, stuck so rigidly to its camera sensors across the Pixel line for years. So to see them switch it up, immediately from one generation to the next is interesting. But if it's in the interest of sort of, going for a more cohesive collection of sensors from Samsung, that makes perfect sense. You'd assume that there's benefits to that from, for their computational photography. Everything points to these being very similar in terms of performance. So it's not like anything is being sacrificed there. It's, purely a name change.
Yeah, it's just a supplier change.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be too worried about it. Another leak that's interesting is we've got some potential pricing for the folding phones from Samsung, the Z Fold 4 and Z Flip 4. Now, these are not US prices, so, again, grain of salt. We always get special pricing in different markets here. But, it's looking like 1,100 for the Z Flip 4, so $100 more roughly than last year. Which, with inflation and supply chain issues, I wouldn't be surprised in the new processor. Again, my gut feeling is that for efficiency, they're going to pick an 8 Plus Gen 1 for the Flip 4. I could be wrong, but that would make the most sense. So, 100 more. Yeah, it sucks. $999 was such a nice number. But then the Fold 3, we're looking at almost 2K. So again, a little more, but in these times, again, these are translated prices. Let's see how it goes, right? What's your take on this? You think they're going to try to keep it the same, or we're going to see a bump?
I have a hard time believing they're going to give up $999. It's just that's such a clean,
such
price
an emotional
point, and it was
price
such a
point.
big moment for foldables and for the flip line. It's just that feels like tough ground to give up. But obviously, it's I understand inflation and everything. It's not. It may be impossible for them to avoid it. For the Z Fold 4, I just would I would love to see that thing come down. It's such a great the last two is have been such great devices, but it's just impractical for so many people to consider a $1,800 phone. That I don't know. You just hope that they get to a point where the hinge design and everything, that they can start to bring some of the other costs down and drop that price. But I didn't think the price was going to go down, but it will be unfortunate to see the price on that one go up, because it would be great if more people could afford it. But this is perhaps not the year for that to happen. So
that's what I'm worried about. Like I am with you. I think that it would be amazing if they could do it. Like, especially since it was it's just such an emotional response price point, right? But at the same time, it's not just that. Samsung's been losing money. We know this. And so, like, how long can they do this, right? Like all those incredible trade-in deals are, going to cost some money in the long run, right? So here's a piece of news that I skipped last week somehow. I think I just had it on my list and it dropped at the last minute because of time. I kind of want to touch on it briefly, simply because we cover wearables here and personal audio and other watches and things. Qualcomm's new Snapdragon W5 and W5 Plus chips. There's a W5 Gen 1 and W5 Plus Gen 1. It's the first major chipset from Qualcomm in years since the Snapdragon Wear 4100. Big news, I think. Some of this is looking very promising for folks who are pining for an Android Wear device, at least. So, I'll check out the link. I'll put it in. It's a link from, Pocket Now, where I'm the managing editor. So check it out. I think this is pretty exciting. What do you think?
Yeah, it is. I don't, the next step is going to be actually seeing it in devices, which has been historically
that's always
the
a challenge,
problem.
right?
Because, the 4100 was announced, years and years ago, and I think it took almost a year and change after it was announced before we finally saw anything ship with it. So, I think we've only had about a year and a half of Snapdragon 4100 devices, despite the fact that the chipset's about 3.5 years old. So it's, but yeah, some of the battery life claims that they're making, that would be fantastic. Get outside of this, everyday charging that we're sort of saddled with if you go with Android Wear or Apple Watch for that matter. That was one of the bigger losses with, Samsung adopting Android Wears, that, the battery life really got reined in on the Galaxy Watch 4 series, versus the past, if you can get to at least 2 to 3 days, that, makes it a lot more plausible to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, here comes the drilling again. I think that what's standing out for me here personally is that 4 nanometer switch. Like they've gone from 12 nanometers. I mean, think about this. The Snapdragon Wear 4100 series is essentially based on a Snapdragon 400 core set. Think that. Like not newer 400, like not 480. I'm talking about Snapdragon 400, the chip that was in the original Moto G, okay? So that's what they were kind of surfing away with still like a few years back. And so this is a big change, 4 nanometers, right? And there's also entire efficiency processor there that can basically just do always on display and keep track of steps and all that other stuff that you need to do. They did that on the 4100 as well, but it's interesting to note that all of that's been radically improved. So I do believe there's no way this can't be better in terms of efficiency. Like there's like such a step forward that the question is, as you said, like, will they be able to deliver wearables that really stand out? Will Android Wear still be a valid, I should say, thing? It's hard to recommend these days. It's, oh man.
No, I mean, Samsung's dragged it back into relevance basically. But it's pretty much just Samsung so far. So I mean, it's going to be, can the Pixel Watch, which is sort of a hilarious concept because the Pixel popularizing anything with the mainstream audience is hardly what you would expect, but it at least it's in terms of Google throwing more weight behind it, it's hopefully means that we get more Wear devices in the next year or so.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And I think, honestly, I'm a big fan of these fitness bands on steroids is what I call them. Like, they don't have apps. They just basically do notifications and all of your health and fitness tracking. And they have a 2-week battery life in a regular watch form factor. Like Huawei makes them, Honor makes them, OnePlus even made one, although they wasn't that great. But eventually, I've been revisited it a year later with all the software updates, and it's actually pretty solid. It's just too bad they kind of, screwed it up at launch. But there's a bunch of them out there from different companies, and I feel those are the ones that always get me excited because, long battery life, you get all your data, basically your well-being, fitness data out of them, and you get notifications in a timely manner, and that's it. And you can tell the time, and they have always on displays too. Most of them, they're OLED, they're beautiful. Some of them are really fancy, have titanium cases or whatever. Some of them are a little more pedestrian, but I like those more than anything. So short of going to an Apple Watch myself, which I don't think I would since I'm not primarily an iPhone user, but short of going to an Apple Watch, to me, like Android Wear and the Galaxy Watches just haven't done it for me. I think the last set of Galaxy Watches is pretty good, but I like the Tizen watches, honestly. I really did. Like, I thought that was you didn't have the voice assistant in the same seamless and beautiful way that you have with Siri and Google Assistant. But again, since I'm used to these fitness band on steroids, I still don't have a Google or Siri or whatever voice assistant on those. So to me, Tizen did the job. But I understand why they switched away from it,
Yeah, and I completely agree. I just don't I don't need to make phone calls from my watch. I have my phone on me. I don't, care if I can do a lot of the, advanced features. If you are one of those people, it's great that those exist, but the trade-off is substantial to get those features because not having another device, having a device I only have to worry about charging a couple times a month is that's irrelevant.
It's a game changer.
Right. Yeah. So it's
absolutely.
Yeah, that's easy. And especially for something that you're using, if fitness is one of your primary concerns, then it's there's nothing worse than your Apple Watch or Galaxy Watch being dead and you're losing all of your tracking, which is if that's the primary purpose of the device for you. I mean, it's why I still recommend Fitbit to a lot of people because as much as Fitbit hasn't made massive advances in recent years, it does deliver tracking and it gives you, lots of days battery life. And you do have a good community behind it too. So, but yeah, I've used those Xiaomi bands and stuff like that too. And I find those to be great as fitness trackers.
100%. For me, what really does it is you said phone calls. All these fitness band on steroids, the ones that I watch actually have essentially Bluetooth connectivity to your phone for voice. And if the speaker has the right, noise canceling features and it's loud enough, right? Like the microphone speaker combo, you actually can take phone calls just as nicely as you would on an Apple Watch. Like on this Honor Watch GS3, I think is what it's called. It's one of those 2-week battery life, essentially a fitness band on steroids. It has Bluetooth, and I've taken calls on it, and it's good. People haven't really complained too much about the sound quality on the other end. So it's not ideal. It's not going to be as good as using your phone, but the Apple Watch always surprises me. Like people take calls with me on their Apple Watches, and I have no idea. It's so good.
Yeah.
So, I think it's not impossible for another company to do the same thing. This is not a Bluetooth issue. It's not a connectivity issue. It's more of a processing the audio properly at the watch level issue. And that could potentially be a challenge for these, low power chipsets, essentially. But overall, I feel that this is good news, this new Snapdragon W5 and W5 Plus Gen 1 chipsets, because for those of you who are looking for a non-Apple Watch, like that's Android Wear or some other OS that's a little heavier and can do some of the fancier things, you might get that now with this chipset from all the diesels and the whatever all those brands are that are using essentially the same guts, but rebranding them in different ways, right? It's cool. It's cool. So yeah, that's basically the news, folks. I just kind of wanted to include this last piece because we missed it last week, and we do cover wearables here. So yeah, Sean, do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet? Obviously, Laptop Mag, but also your social media handles and stuff.
Sure. I'm at Riley Sean M most places because Sean Riley is perhaps one of the most common names in Ireland, so we have to narrow me down slightly. But yeah, you can find me there on Twitter and Instagram, all those form platforms. But otherwise, yeah, everything I do is on Laptop Mag these days, where I'm the assistant managing editor.
So yeah, folks, go read Laptop Mag and check out Sean on Twitter. And if you want to discuss this podcast with me and Sean, please do it on Twitter. My handle, as you know, is at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL. Think like the comic book character, but drop the vowels. That's how you'll remember the handle. That's on Twitter and on Instagram. And of course, Twitter is best to discuss the show. Instagram is where you find pictures of phones, pictures taken with phones, of cars as well, since I cover car tech and EVs. So check out my Instagram if you want some visuals to go along with the show. And speaking of visuals, there's also a couple of YouTube channels you can subscribe to that give you visuals for the show, unboxings and stuff. YouTube.com/MobileTechPodcast and YouTube.com/MobileTechMore. The first channel is most of the phones and wearables and personal audio. And then, of course, the other one, More, is all the travel tech, car tech, home automation, all that stuff. So check it out. You know how YouTube works. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, click the little notification bell, comment in the comments, all that good stuff. Comment about the podcast if you'd like to. That's fine. That's a good way to discuss things as well. And then the podcast itself is at mobiletechpodcast.com. We're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, everywhere good podcasts can be found. And if your app lets you rate or review the show, please consider doing that. You probably also know that I'm the managing editor at Pocket Now, so I would like you to go read Pocket Now, right? Of course, there's a bunch of stuff there. You should expect my OnePlus review soon. And if you want to help out the podcast, there is a Patreon, patreon.com/tankgirl. That's patreon.com/TNKGRL. As I mentioned earlier on the show, you got a video version of the podcast you can get into that is a tier, and that gives you the video less edited, a little earlier than the audio. So audio generally publishes on Sunday. You'll probably get the video on Saturdays, and gets you a chance to watch us maybe brandish some devices, or like I did with the watch a few minutes ago. And it helps me out. So consider helping out. There's also a tier to join the Discord server if you want to chat. So check it out. Help me out. I'd appreciate it. If you don't like to use Patreon, that's cool. There is also a way to help with a PayPal link in the show notes. You click through, give me a $5 donation so I can buy myself another coffee. And, I love my coffee. So Yeah, that would help as well. Appreciate it. I want to thank Audible, though. They've been with us for a really long time as our sponsor. And there's another way you can help. We have a link for you, audibletrial.com/mobiletech. It gives you a 30-day free trial. You get to keep a book at the end, whether you stay or go. Audible is just awesome, right? So if you want to help them, help us, you know the deal. Check it out, audibletrial.com/mobiletech. Audible is the number one platform in the world for audiobooks. If you're like me and you're a bookworm and you love reading, but because you're working on a computer all day, you don't necessarily want to use your eyes again for reading. Maybe it's tiring. So you just put some headphones on, earbuds on, and you just listen to a book. It's magical. It's not just books either. They have some short form stuff. They have some podcasts. Some of the books are super long, great for road trips. If you are a delivery driver and you need to get something else than podcasts under your belt, check out Audible. You can do that while you're driving around town, dropping off all those delicious review units to all of us media. So yeah, check out Audible. I want to thank them again for being our longtime sponsor. That URL again is audibletrial.com/mobiletech. And Sean, thanks for being my guest on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I know I've told people before, but you were one of the first people I ever met in the industry, and you were so very nice to me when I was working for a tiny, tiny little site. So it's always a pleasure.
Well, absolutely. Thanks so much for being my guest. I will have you on the show again at some point in the future. And folks, we will have another podcast next week. So, of course, stay tuned for that. Until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.